Okay, those online can go ahead and go to week 3 check-in module. And click on the podcast on week 3 if you've already done that. Okay, those just joining, make sure and go ahead and click on the check-in module in week 3. We'll get started here in a couple minutes, get some more folks connected. All right, those just joining, make sure and click on the check-in module for week 3. We'll get started here in about a minute. We'll get started at 4:35, so I guess around 2 minutes. All right, I'm gonna go and get started. This is week 3, and those that are connecting as you come in, I did put in the chat module to check in week 3 module. Those coming post session can do that when they watch it later. All right. Well, if you didn't get the notification, we are not only campus closed after 5 tonight, but all day tomorrow. And as of now, campus is open Thursday. We keep an eye out. So tonight we're going to talk about week 3 protecting systems. For the lab this Thursday, we're going to be doing Wireshark on how to scan a network. So you can watch some of that outside of class if you want to. Hopefully you've already checked in. Chapter 3 this week. In-class lab already talked about. Review questions and quiz, as always. Let me go ahead and go to chapter 3 real quick here. All right. So going over fundamentals of application of network attacks, vulnerabilities and mitigating those attacks. Let's see. Chapter 3 is what we want here. All right, we'll look at the different types of attacks that occur on a network, how to poisoning, intercepting poisoning attacks, service attacks, buffer overflow attacks. So when it comes to application attacks, these are attacks that attack a certain application. It could be a Windows app, it could be a Mac app, a phone app, it could be a web app. And so category continues to grow on this target type of application attack. With the advent of mobile apps increasing, more of the attacks are focusing on mobile devices, as you could imagine. Web or client-side attacks, these are browser-only attacks through things like JavaScript or Java-enabled attacks. Buffer overflow attacks. that overcome the system and crash it, and zero-day attacks, which basically exploit previously unknown vulnerabilities, no time to prepare or defend, and a lot of times, and that's why it's called zero-day attacks, they are triggered by a day, calendar day, an event, things of that nature. Web attacks are basically an essential element of organizations today. Web apps, and that's because they're essential to businesses, they're attacked predominantly. And one of the ways to secure a web app is by hardening the web server, by doing things like not allowing people outside your network to ping your network, find out your real IP address, send data to your network, guest access is nullified, things like that. So hardening your network is important. We'll talk a lot about that this semester, ways to harden a network. So here's an example of a website, the internet on the left. You got a web server, an application server, and then the internal network. Folks on the internal network are accessing multiple web apps throughout the day, maybe to log into their payroll, maybe to log into getting time off, maybe the 401k, things like that, maybe scheduling, intranet, a whole bunch of different web apps. The web server basically generally pushes those web apps out and through port 80, which is a simple open port 80, which is an open internet request. So pretty common, fairly low end, low resources, and can be accessed from any computer. Doesn't have to have a client installed usually, so that's why it's real popular for IT to use. Common way to attack web applications is through things like cross-site scripting, where basically you're going to take different code bases and try to attack other code bases. An example, try to attack a SQL database with JavaScript, or a Java database with Python, or Python database application with JavaScript. The other is SQL injection, where if you know the right commands, you can go in the URL of a website that normally goes to like a login.php file or login.html file, and put in the right commands in a username field that might be able to bypass a login and let a hacker in. XML injection. XML is a really popular way to store data because it's very open and easy to pull data. And so one of the ways hackers will inject websites that have web apps that use XML is by injecting with bogus data or incorrect data. And then command injection and directory transversal, where you basically know the right commands. You can command into a network web portal to view directories and files within directories, and maybe even download the entire contents of a website if you know the right commands to use. So here we have an example of a firewall in the middle, this line here. And here we have an example of a web application, services, OS level. And so the OS and services sometimes will be secured by the operating system firewall. And then the application levels where the application resides, let's say it's an intranet site. The web application comes through the outside, coming in to a website, maybe for a calendar or for a web portal for customers. The attack generally is going to come today through the web app itself because it's open through port 80, which allows anyone to get in, and then trying to circumvent it that way. Cross-site scripting is basically where you inject scripts into web apps and directs attacks at a client. And so basically the attacker that injects an XSS file into an XML file to override the system, to maybe give them privileges, user access, things of that nature. And again, a lot of these attacks are through port 80, which anyone can have access to if it's on a website. When a victim visits an injected website, malicious instructions are sent to that browser. It could be a JavaScript file that prompts them to install an application or to click here to continue. And when they do that, it gives them rights to install malicious code on that browser. Could be a phone, could be a tablet, could be a computer. Prime targets today are definitely going to be mobile and Windows devices, because those are the top two used in businesses today. Browser cannot distinguish between valid code and malicious script. It just knows you give it access by clicking on a button. Requirements of targeted website: maybe the user accepts user input without validation. Maybe it also uses input in response without encoding it. And some XSS attacks, cross-site scripting attacks, designed to steal information retained by the browser, like your search history, where you've been on that website, where you've been on that computer, how many apps you have running on that computer, what type of apps, the names of the apps, things of that nature. So here's an example of a bookmark page that accepts user input without validation and provides unencoded response. And so it's just a simple bookmark page where the person thinks they're adding a bookmark to their browser, but they're actually gathering data for this malicious code. And so on the front end, they're entering their name, description, bookmark. They add new bookmark button, and it thanks them for adding it. Now it's a part of their toolbar maybe, and whenever any site that they visit now could be collecting data. You'll notice in the URL, it's actually a local host source, which is a big red flag that it should be external, and it should also probably be a secure connection with HTTPS. So input used as a response. Again, Abby, she typed her name in, and now it just simply takes that response, puts it in the header of the file. Thank you, plus Abby, plus for your submission. Next is SQL injection, where it targets servers by injecting commands, like a structured SQL language, a query to say insert a new record or delete a record. Forgotten password example would be an attacker enters incorrectly formatted email addresses. The response lets attackers know whether input is being validated or not. So they'll simply put in a bogus email just to see if validation is occurring. If validation is not occurring, that's going to help them know they can use SQL injection. Forgotten password. An attacker enters email into field in SQL statement processed by the database. An example would be select a field list from table where field equals whatever or A equals to A. What this is going to be a result is all user emails will be displayed with this command. All emails can be displayed with this command. If they can figure out the name of the field within a record, it could be username, it could be email, select email from, I don't know, email record table where username equals whatever, or A equals A. Now, where it says A equals A equals A basically is always going to be true. So this or statement, whatever or A equals A, is always going to be true, because whatever is irregardless here, because on this statement, whatever or equals A, in order for this to be a true statement, one or the other has to be true. And you'll notice A equals to A in single quotes is always going to be true. And that's how hackers get in and retrieve a lot of times in SQL databases the entire contents of a table. All they have to do is figure out a field name, and a table name that they want. Other SQL injections, statements, whatever, and email is null, determines the names of different fields in the database. Whatever and one is equal, select count from tab name, or should be table name, discovers the name of a table. Whatever or full name like, and then you notice the percentage MIA percentage. This would be specific users. And the percentage on each side basically is a wild card to include all users that have the letters MIA in the middle. A lot of times they'll put in the word admin in there as well, or DM, ADM possibly. If the username is called admin or administrator. Next, whatever. Drop table members, erase the entire database table. Whatever, update members, set email to attacker email at evil.net, where email is equal MIA good.com. Actually, this one here mails a password to the attacker's email account. Next is SQL injection. This is where the markup code is basically being added to the attack. In HTML, they're going to use HTML tags surrounded by brackets, which you might be familiar with HTML or not. Instruct your browser to display a specific format of text. XML then carries that data instead of indicating how to display it. And there's no predefined set of tags, and the user can define their own tags. An attack for XML, similar to SQL, the attacker discovers a website that does not filter user data, and that data may be in an XML file in this case. It injects the XML tags in the database and finds a path using an XPath injection to a specific type of XML and attempts to exploit that path language in the queries. Command injection and directory traversal. This is basically where hackers go in and they try to circumvent a server that's typically restricted for only root users or admin users. And users may be able to access subfolders, but not the parent folder maybe. So sensitive files to protect from unauthorized user access could use like a command.exe, can be used to enter text-based commands. Password Linux could contain user information as well to retrieve those types of email accounts. To attack a directory, you can take advantage of software vulnerability, move the root directory to restricted directories. Attacker moves from root directory to restricted directory. And then the attack for the command injection, the attackers can enter commands to execute on the fly on the web server. They could take a server down or gather data maliciously. Client-side attacks are generally done through JavaScript, because JavaScript runs only on the client side. And so it can be done on a mobile, Windows, Linux, Mac computer, that matters. It's a browser-based attack. Its vulnerabilities are actually in the client app itself, basically interacting with a compromised server to gather data. The client would initiate connection with the server, which could then result in an attack. Could download, like I mentioned earlier, all the files within a web server through this type of attack. And it could instruct the computer to download malware when a person goes to a certain web page, as one of the examples. Could also manipulate the header that contains data for a web page to load. Headers can originate from a web browser, and browsers do not normally allow this. Attackers can short the program and allow modification to when a person hits the submit button, instead of going to a place they're supposed to go, it goes to the hacker's hidden site to gather information or gather data. An example would be on phish websites to where they say to enter in the information and submit it, enter in your current username and password. You think it's going to your company's username password database, but it's going to the hackers. The referrer field indicates site that generates a web page. The attacker can modify this field to hide facts it came from another site, like I mentioned earlier, and it can modify web page hosted from the attacker's computer. So instead of being hosted on a server on your local network, it could actually be referred to a hacker's web server for data collection. The accept language basically is where some web applications pass contents of this field directly to the database. Attacker could inject SQL command by modifying this header, and it could be a lot of websites will actually pass from page to page a username that will say, "Hey Joe, welcome to this page." That data, that variable, can be passed that a hacker can use to attack that client, doing a client attack. Cookies are popular. Almost every web page now has cookies that users have to store on their computer. And web designers and webmasters use it to determine how many pages are being hit on the website, how many pages are being viewed, being accessed. So it's harmless data generally. But hackers can use it to determine specific information on a user's local computer. So it could hack into the client-side hack, and instead of just writing pages that people visit and how long they visit it, it could be storing information like time, location, what applications are running at that current time. Is there any HTTP traffic? HTTPS traffic means secure website traffic, storing those information. Other examples is travel websites storing user travel itinerary, personal information provided when visiting a site, and only the website that created a cookie can read it. And so a client-side attack is a perfect way to get data in an easy way. First-party cookie is basically a cookie created by the website user that's currently visiting. Third-party cookie is advertisers place a cookie to record user preferences. Like a lot of websites now use Facebook to log in, or Twitter, or Gmail, or whatever, or Google. The third-party cookie stores that information where you can store credentials like username in the browser and even password at times. Session cookie is where it's stored in the RAM and expires when that browser is totally closed. Persistent cookie is where it's recorded on the drive of the computer and does not expire when the browser closes. And then secure cookie is used only when the browser visits a server over a secure connection. It's always encrypted. Flash cookies aren't used much anymore because it needs flash to work, but it's still around on older websites. Cookies do pose security and privacy risks because they can be stolen, can be impersonated by impersonating a user, and they're not really that user. Can use to tailor advertising, and can also be exploited by attackers. Also on client-side attacks are session hijacking, where the attacker can attempt to impersonate a user by stealing or guessing session token. Malicious add-ons can be also prompted on a client side for multimedia, to play a video, to store a file, just to name a couple. So here's an example of a session hijack. You've got the victim on the top row. You also have that victim that sends a session token over to a web server, and a man-in-the-middle attacker listens in on that session, takes that session ID, as you can see below, and now poses as that person in that session to hijack that session. And that session ID could be a token from a bank, a token from a secure site, your email, things of that nature. That's why it's real vital, especially in hotspots and things of that nature, never to go to critical secure websites because of this very reason here, unless you're 100% sure you're not being connected via man-in-the-middle attack, which is impossible to do sometimes. And so best to surf the web and secure websites on your phone that's not connected to the internet or to the network or to the web or Wi-Fi that's connected to cellular, which is less likely to be hacked. Client-side attacks can have such things like buffer overflow that basically overflows a web page or a website and stops functioning. The attacker can return the address and then push back malware into the code to interject into that client. Malware that could be toolbars, it could be pop-ups, it could be keyboard logger, things like that. So basically what the malware is going to do in the buffer overflow attack below, it's going to basically take the malware and inject it into a program and fill up and overflow that program module to where it crashes, and then the malware can inject itself and stay within the programmer from that point on, or the program from that point on. Network attacks. These are popular network attacks. Denial of service, where attempts to prevent system from performing normal functions. A ping flood attack is where a web server is attacked millions of times a minute to overflow the web server and crash it. A Smurf attack is where ping requests are sent, which we'll do a ping lab here in a few weeks. Ping request is sent to the original address, with the originating address changed. Appears as if the target computer is asking for response for all computers on the network. Denial of service is where you take advantage of procedures for establishing a connection and maliciously take advantage of that to take down an application or a web server. Distributed denial of service, DDoS, is where the attackers take control of multiple computers and can turn them into zombie computers in a botnet to flood an entire network, or we've seen it in history, entire continents of databases or internet being brought down. Virtually impossible to identify because and block source of attack because they're literally coming from millions of different zombie computers. So on a flood attack, you'll notice here the victim here sends the attacker's computer basically is going to send some information to the server to overflow it with a whole bunch of data to basically get acknowledgement, and then try to go in and weaken the network to interject or crash the network. Interception, talked about already a little bit this semester, man in the middle, where you intercept legitimate communication. A few slides back showed that. Forges a fictitious response to the sender. Passive attack, records transmitted data. What I mean by passive is the end users can be doing their normal business or normal activity and not know that their data is being viewed in a man-in-the-middle computer attack. Active attack alters contents of transmission before sending. Most man-in-the-middle attacks are going to just be passive to gather data, your internet activity, your username and passwords, things like that. Reply attacks are similar to passive man-in-the-middle attack, but its job is to reply with a certain response, like, for instance, a password file or a password attack. Reply attack basically makes a copy of a transmission. An example, capturing your login credentials when a person logs in. So as soon as they log in, it captures that, replies back to the hacker in a man-in-the-middle attack. Sophisticated reply attack is where the attacker captures network devices, messages to the server, later sends the original valid message to the server, and then establishes trust relationship between the attacker and server. Poisoning, and there's a lab we do this semester on ARP poisoning, where the attacker modifies the MAC address in an ARP cache to point to a different computer. Basically, what they're generally trying to do is guise themselves as the server in that environment, and then all traffic will come through that server to gather data. Poisoning is where basically its job of ARP poisoning is to steal data. An attacker could substitute their own MAC address and steal data intended for another computer. Prevent internet access. An attacker could substitute an invalid MAC address for the network gateway, so no user could access external networks. Man-in-the-middle attack is where a man-in-the-middle device could be set to receive all communication. That's the lab we're going to do this semester. I substitute a MAC address. And then a DOS, the valid IP address of the DOS target could be substituted with an invalid MAC address, causing all traffic designated to the target to fail. So when DNS poisoning occurs, the domain name system is what DNS stands for, is current basis for name resolution of an IP. When you type in GoDaddy.com or Google.com, DNS is the name I just mentioned, GoDaddy or Google.com. When you type it in, it's actually converted to an IP address that goes over the internet to grab that website and to bring it down to your browser. DNS poisoning is where it substitutes the DNS address, the IP address, to redirect to a computer to another device. So DNS poisoning, which we'll do in the classroom with the man in the middle, when you type in Facebook, it's going to go to the attacker machine. Everybody in the room is going to go to the attacker machine that's running a fake Facebook page to gather users' username and passwords. So in that attack, show you how easy it is for attackers to gather username and passwords. And the majority of people, when they, and the setup on the attack basically to fail when you try to log in, human nature and studies show that people will, on a failed attempt login page, within a minute, will have attempted to use every single password that they use currently in that failed attempt session. So hackers can use that information with a DNS man-in-the-middle attack in tandem with a list of websites that they go to during that session to hack into things like bank accounts, social security, credit cards, the list goes on and on. Two locations for DNS poisoning: the local host table on the local computer and the external DNS server on the server in that location. So an example of DNS poisoning: the attacker's computers on the upper left, the good users on the lower left, the valid DNS servers in the middle there, the attacker's DNS servers on the right. So what happens in the man-in-the-middle DNS poisoning is the attacker changes what the address is of www.evil.net. You'll notice on number 2 sends it to and through the attacker's DNS server, ns.evil.net, to the valid DNS server. Number 3 shows all of the addresses, good.net, better.net, best.net, all being pointed to one IP address, which is the attacker's address. So any website, any data that they go to on a computer, that good user, is going to go through the attacker's computer, all that traffic, instead of the valid server. Attacks on access rights is privilege escalation, where software can be exploited to gain access. Lower privilege users can access restricted higher user privileges, and users with restricted privilege accesses different restriction privileges of a similar user, where you can basically get access to things as an admin would. Could also give a different user different access rights with this type of attack. So in summary, web apps have flaws, can be circumvented through port 80, through XSS attack, scripting attacks, through interjection of SQL, through client-side attacks. And so one of the things you'll learn this semester as we go through all of these different labs is how to harden a network to where it makes it not impossible, but very difficult for these type of attacks to occur. So let's go over the assignments for this week. In the syllabus for week 3, let's look at the due dates. We've got a quiz for week 3, which is over the chapter content for this week. Week 3, chapter 3. Week 3 lab, we're doing a class on Thursday. We're going to be doing on this one, Wireshark. You can read these if you want to prior to class. This podcast, watch outside of class. That'd be great if you could do that to be ready for it. And then review questions for chapter 3 and picking a research paper topic. I'll click on that. I want to go over that real quick. Research paper topic is due this Sunday. And all you need to do is pick one of these topics, these 21 topics. If you don't like any of them or not really feel you like some of them maybe, but don't really feel the need to research those or want to research those, not really interesting to you, you can search another topic. That's why 22 is there. So by Sunday at midnight, you will post the research topic that you have chosen. Try to be as exact as you can in the research topic. What I mean by that is don't just say, ways to secure a Wi-Fi network. Maybe be more exact, like, be more finite in it, like 5 ways to secure a Wi-Fi network or 3 ways to secure a Wi-Fi network. Now, if you change the number of that later down the road, that's fine. That just shows me you're thinking of more narrow research, okay, than a more broadband. So I'm just saying, what's the security ramifications of people that search the web? That's pretty broad. My focus on how do you search a web securely? How do you buy things and search a web securely? Buying things online might be a better way to do it. Okay, so be just more exact on your search criteria for your research paper topic. If it's another, meaning it's not the first 21 in the list and it's maybe 22, and you got a question that, is it something you recommend or you allow me to do? Just ask me the question via email and I will let you know. That concludes week 3. Thanks for those that joined tonight. Stay warm tomorrow and Thursday. It's supposed to be very cold, brutally cold, so dangerously cold. I believe all the schools are closed, and I know many of you have to work like I do during the day. And so just be careful tomorrow. Take your time. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see everybody Thursday.